Hello, YouTubers. Joe Kersey here on Sunday, May 18th, 2014 at 14:20 in the afternoon Eastern Daylight Time. Um, Today, I have another one of my operating room stories to tell you. This was prompted by excuse me, an acquaintance who had casually asked me, had I ever tried LSD? And I said, no, I had no desire to do so. Plus, you heard all these horror stories about it. And, well, that obviously, you started hearing about the horror stories back in the 60s and so forth. And over the years, it seems to me, just from what you hear, because you keep your ear to the ground, don't you, that there's some people out there that have really horrible experiences, and a few of those have long-term consequences. Now, whether that's due to the fact it's impure drug and there's the congeners that they hadn't expected that are interacting with that, you don't know. In any case, some folks have horrible experiences. Some folks then, after the horrible experience, are okay, and it's become increasingly clear to me that a number of these people that take this stuff, it's as long as they've got somebody there to sort of take care of them while they're doing this. It's more or less, well, I won't say benign, but it's not all that damaging. This is not a course I would suggest to anybody, despite the fact that I think basically anybody should be allowed to ingest anything they want at any time, as long as they don't drive. Well, having said that, I got to thinking. Well, I flashed back. Oh, the question about LSD, caused me to flash back. I flashed back to an operating room in Fort Wayne, Indiana. In 1979, and I was doing one of these things that was called a local standby. Well, I don't know if they even use that phrase anymore, but what it is the surgeon's going to do a local anesthetic on generally some sort of extremity Ditzel type procedure, and sometimes more than just a Ditzel. Sometimes it can be like a long hand case, that sort of thing, and then your job as the anesthesiologist is to basically, Lord knows why they just didn't want these people to go to sleep. It would have been infinitely easier, and the person would have gotten far less drug, when all was said and done, particularly if the case is going to go on for over an hour and a half, 2 hours, then dinking in this half-assed cocktail of various drugs to try to keep the patient sedated, more or less pain-free, particularly, after about 2 hours, the tourniquet on some of these arm cases gets painful. You relieve that arm pain, that tourniquet pain. And maybe ideally not remember too much of it, but yet if they had to cooperate, like wiggle their finger or, something, they could. Now this is, basically you're asking somebody to use 3 or 4 drugs that were not designed to achieve this goal in small doses put in together to try to achieve this goal. I hated being involved in these things. They were just, well, for the reasons I just told you. Just put them to sleep. Ventilate them. They won't remember anything. They won't hurt. Period. And with propofol type techniques now, it's like a no-brainer. Well, at that time they didn't have propofol. Nowadays, I guess you might have just a very low dose propofol, sort of a sub-Michael Jackson dose of propofol throughout the case. Because if you turn it off, the guy just comes right back up, because that's the kind of drug it is. And but then we were using, well, before midazolam, in the Valium era rather than the Versed era, the diazepam era, you had to use, well, I generally didn't use diazepam because it was just a tremendously long-acting drug in some people. So you ended up, you have to use some of these, you can give them a little narcotic, that's fine. Sometimes one of these half-assed narcotics like nalbuphine, yeah, and none of these really do a good job, and there were guys that would, squirt in like 5 milligram increments of pentothal. Just everybody had their own little mix. Well, I got so that I would take 50 milligrams of ketamine and dilute it up, and then I'd give maybe half cc every so often. So you give them 2.5, 3 milligrams at a time over the course of the case. Now, ketamine, I started out with LSD, and here comes the tie-in. Excuse me. A lot of pollen today, guys. Just took a Benadryl. I might drift off. Ketamine is probably the closest thing to IV LSD you can get. It's a controlled substance. It's class 2. Ketamine's class 2, or at least it was when I stopped working on the DEA drug schedule. And it's a very effective drug. Very effective drug. I mean, it has some beneficial effects in neurosurgery. It can be used as an induction agent, a maintenance agent. But it can also be used in very low doses as just a pure analgesic, meaning the person's lying there and they have this low dose of ketamine on board, and somebody could be chopping on them, sometimes even without local anesthetic, and they won't feel it. They'll be aware of it. They'll know something's going on, but they won't hurt. They'll feel it in the sense of like, oh, somebody's touching me, but they won't hurt. And it worked a lot better in some of these half-assed, overdose them, unintentionally with narcotics and half-assed narcotic techniques with in the face of, even with Versed, even with midazolam, So I was doing one of these hand cases with some guy up in Fort Warren. It was going to be a 2.5 hour case. And and they did the tourniquet, and all this kind of thing, exsanguinate the arm and wrap the arm and exsanguinate the arm and turn on the tourniquet. And he injected some local around the operative site. And I start kind of goosing in, various drugs, one of which is ketamine, like as I said, 2, 3, 4 milligrams at a time. You'd have about a 5-minute, 7-minute window between each dose. And this guy went off. The patient went off into kind of la la land. Now he didn't get agitated. Some people will get agitated when you do this, but he didn't. And I thought, well, let's see if we can just kind of quiet him down so he just kind of doesn't get too stirred up here, because the case is sort of going on a little bit long, as hand cases often do. every hand surgeon I've ever met's a fuss budget too, which I guess is good in a hand surgeon. But just, give me an honest estimate of how long it's going to take, guys, so I could plan. And so one of the features about ketamine that, quite honestly, I had not been all that aware of at the time. There's a certain threshold when you're giving low dose ketamine that it blocks the superior colliculus in your brain. Now, the superior colliculus is where, you have the optic nerves that come back and they cross in the optic chiasm and they go back to the two superior colliculi. And then after that, another set of neurons goes into the occipital cortex, and that's actually how you see. That's the neurology of vision. But so the ketamine blocks the supraocular colliculi, and that's really one of the first profound neurologic, central nervous system effects it has. Because a lot of the other stuff is done on spinal cord, via the spinal cord. It blocks NMDA receptors in the spinal cord, and before it does any of this stuff up here. And at least that was the thinking at the time. I think that's probably still accurate. So this guy, suddenly, he rose up off the table. He sat up. Now his arm was kind of strapped down, but he sits up. And, this guy was one of these big sort of corporate executive types, for one of the banks in Fort Wayne. And, a patient, whom if one dealt with him, you would not want to get a bad rep around town. This guy sits up and he waves his, untethered arm in the air and he says, "I'm blind! I've gone blind!" Well, suffice to say, it was a very lively few following minutes in that operation. I ended up just putting him to sleep and tubing him and ventilating him, because the case went on. And when he woke up, he wasn't blind. It's what happens is this is a very transient, reversible effect of ketamine when you just hit that one sort of little, one extra molecule, one molecule over the line, and of course he didn't remember squat about any of this. He didn't remember anything about any of this stuff. I'll tell you, we almost had to put a pan or a sheet under that surgeon when that guy stood up there and said that, or sat up there and said that. You might have had to throw one down for me too. Well, so much for my ketamine operating room drug story. All righty, bye-bye, YouTubers.